During the billion-dollar meeting, the waitress read the Arabic fine print, saving the investors from a royal scam. The crystal chandeliers of Le Ciel Bleu cast golden light across the marble floors, each beam reflecting off silverware that cost more than most people's monthly rent. Maya Chen moved through the main dining room with practiced invisibility, her black uniform pressed to perfection, her dark hair pulled back in a neat bun that revealed delicate features and intelligent brown eyes that had learned to look down, rather than meet the gazes of the wealthy patrons she served. She had perfected the art of being unseen. Over the past 2 years, it was safer that way. Safer than being recognized. Safer than anyone discovering that the quiet waitress refilling water glasses had once been called a prodigy. That she had stood before lecture halls at MIT discussing the intricate poetry of classical Arabic. That her dissertation on commercial dialect variations across the Gulf states had been praised as groundbreaking. That was before Richard Blackwell stole it. All Maya pushed the thought away as she had done 1,000 times before, focusing instead on the weight of the tray in her hands, the rhythm of her steps, the careful choreography of service that kept her employed and anonymous. The restaurant manager, Pierre, appeared at her elbow with unusual urgency in his expression. "Maya, we need you in the salon privé tonight. The regular server called in sick, and we have a very important party." "Very important." His French accent thickened with stress. "Sheikh Khalid al-Rashid has reserved the entire private dining room. Do you understand what this means? This man could buy this restaurant with what he spends on watches." Maya nodded, her stomach tightening slightly. She had served wealthy clients before, but there was something in Pierre's tone that suggested this was different. She followed him through the main dining room, past the curious stares of regular patrons, toward the ornate double doors that led to the salon privé, a space reserved for those who valued privacy as much as luxury. Pierre paused at the doors, straightening his tie. "Remember, Maya, invisible but attentive. They should never notice you, but their glasses should never be empty." "Understood?" "Understood," she replied softly. The doors opened and Maya stepped into a different world. The private salon was a masterpiece of understated opulence. Floor-to-ceiling windows overlooked the Manhattan skyline, the city lights creating a glittering backdrop that competed with the room's own chandelier. A single long table dominated the space, set for 8 with china so fine it was nearly translucent. But it was the men gathered around that table who truly commanded attention. 7 of them stood in clusters, speaking in low voices, their tailored suits probably costing more than Maya earned in 6 months. But it was the 8th man who drew every eye in the room, even when he wasn't speaking. Sheikh Khalid al-Rashid stood by the windows, his back to the room, hands clasped behind him. As he gazed out at the city he clearly viewed as just another territory to conquer. He was tall, perhaps 6'2", with broad shoulders that filled his custom-made suit with effortless authority. When he turned, Maya caught her first glimpse of his face, sharp features, a neatly trimmed beard touched with grey, and eyes so dark they seemed to absorb light rather than reflect it. He was perhaps in his late 40s, but carried himself with the confidence of someone who had never heard the word no and meant it. "Gentlemen," his voice cut through the murmured conversations like a blade, accented but precise, each word chosen with the care of someone who knew language was power. "Shall we begin?" They moved to the table with the coordination of men accustomed to such gatherings. Maya stepped forward to pour water, making herself small, invisible, exactly as Pierre had instructed. But as she reached toward Khalid's glass, his eyes flicked to her just for a moment, and she felt the weight of assessment in that glance. Then he looked away, dismissing her existence as easily as one might dismiss a shadow. She had been looked through before. It shouldn't have stung, but somehow from this man it did. "Mr. al-Rashid," one of the American investors began, a silver-haired man whose smile was too wide to be genuine, "we're thrilled to finally formalize our partnership. $500 million is just the beginning of what we can accomplish together." Khalid inclined his head slightly. "Indeed. Though I must say, Mr. Patterson, in my experience, the beginning is when one must be most careful. It is easy to start a journey. It is much harder to ensure you are traveling in the right direction." There was something in his tone, not quite suspicion, but a sharpness that suggested this was a man who trusted no one completely. Maya filed that observation away as she moved around the table, pouring wine with steady hands. Of course, Patterson laughed, though it sounded forced. That's why we've prepared such comprehensive contracts. Everything is spelled out in perfect detail. My legal team has been working on this for months. At the mention of the legal team, another man spoke up. Maya's hand froze for just a fraction of a second, the wine bottle tilting dangerously before she caught herself. She knew that voice. God help her, she knew that voice. Indeed, Dr. Richard Blackwell said, his smooth baritone filling the room with practiced charm. I've personally overseen every clause, every contingency. This contract is airtight, Sheikh al-Rashid. You'll find everything is exactly as we discussed. A true partnership built on mutual benefit and absolute transparency. Maya kept her eyes down, her heart hammering against her ribs. Richard was here. Of course he was here. The universe had a cruel sense of humor. She hadn't seen him in 2 years, not since the day she had confronted him about the stolen dissertation, the day he had looked at her with such cold contempt and said, "Who do you think they'll believe, Maya? A nobody graduate student or me?" He hadn't recognized her yet. Why would he? She was just a waitress, part of the furniture, invisible. She needed to stay that way. Transparency, Khalid repeated, rolling the word around as if tasting it. A beautiful concept. Though in my experience, Mr. Blackwell, true transparency is rare in business. There are always shadows, always fine print, always details that somehow escape notice until it is too late. Richard's smile never wavered. Which is why we've prepared everything in both English and Arabic, as you requested. Complete transparency in both languages. How thoughtful, Khalid murmured. But Maya detected something in his voice, a note of skepticism that the others seemed to miss. The dinner progressed with the careful dance of high-stakes negotiation, disguised as casual conversation. Maya served course after course, each dish a work of culinary art that the men barely noticed as they discussed market projections, expansion strategies, and profit margins that made her head spin. She was good at her job. Glasses were refilled before they emptied. Plates appeared and disappeared with silent efficiency, and she remained perfectly, completely invisible, until the moment she wasn't. It happened as she was refilling wine glasses during the main course. One of the investors, a younger man who had been drinking more than eating, gestured expansively while making a point about renewable energy markets. His hand caught the edge of Maya's tray, and she watched in horror as time seemed to slow down. The wine bottle tilted, and despite her desperate attempt to catch it, a stream of deep red Bordeaux splashed across the sleeve of Patterson's pristine white shirt. The table fell silent. Patterson's face flushed crimson, matching the wine stain. "You clumsy—" "It was an accident," Maya said quickly, her voice steady despite her racing heart. She grabbed a napkin, moving to blot the stain, but Patterson jerked away from her. "An accident? Do you have any idea how much this shirt costs?" "This is Brioni, you stupid girl." "I apologize, sir. If you'll allow me to—" "You'll what? You've already ruined it." Patterson stood, his chair scraping back. "Where is the manager? I want this incompetent woman fired immediately." Maya felt her face burn with humiliation. She had been so careful, so perfect for 2 years, and now this. She opened her mouth to apologize again, but before she could speak, another voice cut through the tension. "Mr. Patterson." Khalid's voice was quiet, but it carried absolute authority. "Please sit down." Patterson turned to him, sputtering. "But I saw what happened. Your colleague's careless gesture caused the spill. The young woman was simply doing her job." Khalid's dark eyes fixed on Patterson with an intensity that made the older man visibly shrink. "Now you have 2 choices. You can sit down and continue our discussion like a professional, or you can continue this embarrassing display. And I will assume that your judgment is too poor to be trusted with $500 million of my money. Choose quickly." The silence that followed was absolute. Patterson's face went through several shades of red before settling on a sickly pale. He sat down slowly, not meeting anyone's eyes. "I apologize, Sheikh al-Rashid. You're right, of course." The heat of the moment. He trailed off, reaching for his water glass with a shaking hand. Khalid didn't acknowledge the apology. Instead, he turned his attention to Maya for the first time that evening, really looking at her. She felt pinned by that gaze, like a butterfly on a collector's board. His eyes narrowed slightly, and she saw intelligence there, sharp and assessing. "You handled that with remarkable composure," he said, his tone neutral but not unkind. "What is your name?" "Maya, sir." Maya Chen. Her voice came out steadier than she felt. Maya Chen, he repeated as if filing it away. Then he nodded once, a gesture of dismissal that was somehow less insulting than being ignored. Continue with your service, please. She nodded and stepped back, her hands trembling slightly as she retrieved a fresh bottle of wine. The conversation resumed, but the atmosphere had shifted. The investors were more subdued, more careful. And Maya noticed that Khalid's eyes occasionally flicked in her direction, though whether with curiosity or continued assessment, she couldn't tell. As the dinner moved toward its conclusion, Pierre appeared with the dessert course, giving Maya a brief respite. She stepped out into the hallway, leaning against the wall and taking deep breaths to steady herself. That had been too close. She couldn't afford to lose this job. She couldn't afford to be noticed. But as she stood there, she heard voices from inside the salon. The door hadn't closed completely. She knew she should walk away, should give them privacy, but something made her pause. So, gentlemen, Khalid was saying, tomorrow we sign. You have the contracts ready. Absolutely, Richard's voice responded. I have them right here, actually. Both versions, English and Arabic. Perhaps you'd like to review them one final time tonight. We could go through any questions you might have. That won't be necessary. I have my own legal team reviewing them as we speak. They should have their analysis by morning. There was a pause, and Maya heard papers rustling. Of course. Though I assure you, everything is in perfect order. This is a standard partnership agreement, just scaled for the size of the investment. Nothing involving $500 million is standard, Mr. Blackwell. Fair point, Richard laughed. But I think you'll find we've been more than fair. This partnership will revolutionize renewable energy in the Gulf states. Your vision, our capital and infrastructure, it's the perfect combination. More rustling of papers. Maya knew she should move, should return to the kitchen, but something kept her frozen in place. Maybe it was hearing Richard's voice again, that same smooth confidence he had used when he had stolen her work and destroyed her career. Maybe it was the way Khalid had defended her, unexpected and unnecessary. Or maybe it was simply that she had been invisible for so long that she had forgotten what it felt like to be part of something important. Leave the contracts here, Khalid said finally. I'll review them myself tonight. Old habit. I like to read everything personally before I sign, of course. We'll reconvene tomorrow at 10 for the signing ceremony. The press will be there, naturally. This is a historic partnership. The sound of chairs pushing back signaled the end of the dinner. Maya quickly straightened and moved back toward the kitchen, not wanting to be caught eavesdropping. But as she pushed through the door, she glanced back and saw through the gap as the men filed out of the salon, all except Khalid, who remained seated at the table, the contracts spread before him, his expression unreadable, and all except Richard, who paused at the door, looking back at the Sheikh with a smile that didn't reach his eyes. Maya shivered, though she couldn't say why. She returned to the kitchen, helped with the cleanup, and tried to forget the strange tension she had witnessed. It wasn't her business. These were powerful men making powerful deals, and she was just a waitress who had narrowly avoided disaster. But as she changed out of her uniform an hour later, as she stepped out into the cool New York night and began her walk to the subway, she couldn't shake the feeling that something was wrong. Something about those contracts, about Richard's too smooth assurances, about the way Khalid had looked at those papers with such intensity. She told herself it didn't matter. It wasn't her world anymore. She had left that behind when Richard had stolen her dissertation and destroyed her academic career. She was just a waitress now, invisible and safe. But that night, as she lay in her tiny studio apartment, she dreamed of Arabic script flowing across pages, of hidden meanings buried in beautiful calligraphy, of secrets concealed in plain sight. She dreamed of contracts written in languages most people couldn't read, and she dreamed of a man with dark eyes who had defended her when he didn't have to, who had seen her when everyone else looked through her. She woke before dawn with her heart racing, though she couldn't remember why. 3 blocks away, in a penthouse suite overlooking Central Park, Khalid al-Rashid sat at a desk covered in contracts, his eyes scanning line after line of Arabic text. His expression was troubled, his usual confidence replaced by something that looked almost like doubt. He reached for his phone, then hesitated. His instincts were screaming that something was wrong, but he couldn't quite identify what. The contracts seemed legitimate. The terms were as discussed. Everything appeared to be in order. But 30 years of business had taught him to trust his instincts, and his instincts were telling him that somewhere in these pages, hidden in the elegant script and legal terminology, was a trap. He just couldn't see it. Not yet. The next morning arrived with the kind of crisp autumn clarity that made New York feel like the center of the universe. Maya's shift didn't start until noon, which gave her the rare luxury of a slow morning. She made coffee in her tiny kitchen, sat by her single window overlooking the fire escape, and tried not to think about the previous night. She failed spectacularly. Every time she closed her eyes, she saw Richard's face, heard his smooth voice making promises about transparency and partnership. She had heard that voice before, had believed it once. She knew exactly how much Richard's promises were worth, but it wasn't her problem. She had learned that lesson the hard way. When she had tried to expose his theft of her dissertation, when she had gone to the department head with her evidence, Richard had been ready. He had painted her as a jealous student, unstable and obsessed, unable to accept that her work wasn't as groundbreaking as she believed. He had colleagues who vouched for him, a reputation that preceded him, and the kind of confidence that made people believe him without question. Maya had been left with nothing, no degree, no career, no future in academia. She had been lucky to find work at Le Ciel Bleu, lucky to have a roof over her head and enough money for food. She had learned to be grateful for invisibility, so why couldn't she stop thinking about those contracts? She arrived at the restaurant at 11:30, changed into her uniform, and was tying her apron when Pierre found her in the staff room. His expression was strange, excited and nervous in equal measure. "Maya, I need you to do something unusual today." She looked up, immediately wary. "What kind of unusual?" "Sheikh al-Rashid called this morning. He's requested that you specifically serve him lunch in the salon privé. Just him, no guests. He asked for you by name." Maya's stomach dropped. Why would he do that? Pierre shrugged, but his eyes were calculating. "Who knows why the wealthy do anything? Perhaps he was impressed by your professionalism last night. Perhaps he wants to apologize for the incident. Perhaps he simply prefers consistency in his service. It doesn't matter why, Maya. When a man like that makes a request, we fulfill it." "Understood." She wanted to refuse. Every instinct told her that this was dangerous, that being noticed was the last thing she needed. But she also knew that refusing would raise questions she couldn't answer, would draw exactly the kind of attention she had spent 2 years avoiding. "Understood," she said quietly. "Good. He'll arrive at 12:30. Make sure everything is perfect." The next hour passed in a blur of preparation. Maya set the table in the salon privé herself, making sure every detail was flawless. She checked and rechecked the wine selection, the water glasses, the placement of silverware. She told herself it was just another service, just another wealthy client. Nothing to be nervous about. She was lying to herself. And she knew it. At exactly 12:30, the doors to the salon opened and Khalid al-Rashid walked in. He was alone, without the entourage of investors and lawyers from the previous night. In the daylight streaming through the windows, he looked somehow more human, still imposing, still radiating authority, but less like a force of nature and more like a man. He wore a different suit today, charcoal grey with subtle pinstripes, and Maya noticed details she had missed the night before. The way he moved with absolute confidence but without arrogance. The slight lines around his eyes that suggested he smiled more than his serious expression indicated. The way his gaze swept the room, taking in everything, missing nothing, including her. "Miss Chen," he said, his accent making her name sound exotic. "Thank you for accommodating my request." "Of course, sir." "It's my pleasure." She gestured to the table. "Please sit wherever you're comfortable." He chose a seat by the window, positioning himself so he could see both the door and the skyline. A man who never left his back exposed, Maya noted. A man who had learned to be careful. "I'll bring the menu. That won't be necessary. I'm not particularly hungry." He gestured to the chair across from him. "Please sit." Maya froze. "Sir, I don't think—" "I'm not asking as a customer, Miss Chen. I'm asking as someone who needs your help." His dark eyes met hers, and she saw something there that surprised her. Uncertainty. "Please." Slowly, feeling like she was making a terrible mistake, Maya sat down, her hands folded in her lap. her back straight, every muscle tense with the wrongness of this situation. Waitresses didn't sit with customers. Invisible people didn't get invited to tables. Khalid reached into his jacket and pulled out a thick folder, placing it on the table between them. Maya recognized it immediately, the contracts from last night. "I have a problem," he said without preamble. "These contracts are supposed to formalize a $500 million partnership. My legal team has reviewed them and found nothing concerning. My financial advisors say the terms are fair. My business partners assure me everything is transparent and legitimate." He paused, his jaw tightening. "But my instincts tell me something is wrong. And in 30 years of business, my instincts have never been wrong." Maya stared at the folder, her heart beginning to race. "I don't understand what this has to do with me, sir. Last night when that fool Patterson attacked you, you remained calm, composed. You didn't panic, didn't make excuses, didn't grovel. You simply handled the situation with grace." He leaned forward slightly. "That kind of composure under pressure is rare. It suggests someone who has faced worse and survived. Someone who knows how to think clearly when others lose their heads. I'm just a waitress, sir. Are you?" His eyes narrowed. "Because I had my people look into you, Miss Chen. I hope you'll forgive the intrusion, but I've learned to be thorough. And what I found was interesting." Maya's blood ran cold. "I don't know what you think you found. MIT. Graduated summa cum laude with a degree in linguistics. Specialization in Semitic languages, with particular focus on Arabic dialects. Accepted into the doctoral program with full scholarship. Published 3 papers on commercial language variations in Gulf states before you were 24. He paused, watching her face. "And then nothing. You disappeared from academia 2 years ago, and now you're serving tables in Manhattan. That's quite a fall, Miss Chen, which makes me wonder, what happened?" She wanted to run, wanted to stand up and walk out and never come back. But his eyes held her pinned, and beneath the directness of his gaze she saw something unexpected. Not judgment, but curiosity. Maybe even respect. "I made a mistake," she said finally, her voice barely above a whisper. "I trusted the wrong person, Dr. Richard Blackwell." Her head snapped up. "How did you—" "The same Richard Blackwell who is the lead legal consultant on these contracts. The same Richard Blackwell who published a groundbreaking dissertation on Arabic, commercial dialects 2 years ago. A dissertation that launched his career as an expert in international business. Law." Khalid's expression hardened. "The same dissertation you wrote, I suspect." Tears burned behind Maya's eyes, but she refused to let them fall. "I can't prove it." He was too careful. "And even if I could, who would believe me? He's Dr. Richard Blackwell, respected scholar and attorney." "I'm nobody." "You're not nobody, Miss Chen. You're someone who understands Arabic commercial language better than anyone I've ever met. Which is why I need you to do something for me." He pushed the folder across the table toward her. "I need you to read these contracts. Not the English version. My team has already reviewed that. I need you to read the Arabic version. Every word, every clause, every piece of fine print. And I need you to tell me if my instincts are right." Maya stared at the folder as if it were a snake. "Sir, I haven't worked in that field for 2 years. I'm not qualified. You're the most qualified person I know. And more importantly, you're someone who has already been betrayed by Richard Blackwell. If anyone can spot his deceptions, it's you." She looked up at him, saw the intensity in his eyes, the absolute certainty that she could do this. When was the last time someone had looked at her like that? When was the last time someone had seen her as anything other than invisible? "If I find something," she said slowly, "if there really is something wrong with these contracts, what will you do?" "I'll make sure the truth comes out. And I'll make sure Richard Blackwell faces consequences for his actions. All of his actions." He leaned back, his expression softening slightly. "I'm offering you a chance, Miss Chen. A chance to use your skills again. A chance to stop hiding. And perhaps a chance for justice." Justice. The word hung in the air between them, heavy with promise and danger. Maya had given up on justice 2 years ago. She had accepted that the world wasn't fair, that sometimes the villains won and the heroes disappeared into obscurity. But here was a man offering her a chance to fight back, a chance to matter again. Her hand trembled as she reached for the folder. "I'll need time. These contracts are extensive, and if there's something hidden it won't be obvious. Take all the time you need. I've postponed the signing until tomorrow morning. That gives you approximately 20 hours. He stood pulling a business card from his pocket and placing it on the table. My personal number. Call me when you find something. Not if when. I trust your instincts as much as I trust my own. He walked toward the door, then paused and looked back. Miss Chen? Thank you. For your courage last night and for your courage now. Both are rare qualities. Then he was gone, leaving Maya alone with the contracts and a choice that would change everything. She sat there for a long moment, staring at the folder. She could walk away, could tell Pierre she was sick, could leave these contracts untouched, could return to her safe, invisible life. No one would blame her. She had already lost everything once. Why risk it again? But then she opened the folder and saw the elegant Arabic script flowing across the pages, and something inside her that had been dormant for 2 years suddenly woke up. This was her language, her expertise, her passion. This was who she had been before Richard had stolen it all. Maybe it was time to take it back. Maya pulled the contracts closer and began to read. The afternoon shift came and went without her. Pierre found her in the salon privé 3 hours later, still bent over the contracts, and she barely noticed his presence. She waved him away with a distracted hand, her eyes never leaving the pages. Her mind fully engaged for the first time in 2 years. The Arabic was beautiful, classical and formal, the kind of language used in the most important business dealings. The English translation seemed accurate at first glance, covering all the major points: investment amounts, profit-sharing, decision-making authority, dispute resolution. But Maya had spent 5 years studying the subtle variations in commercial Arabic, the tiny differences in phrasing that could completely change meaning. She knew that in this language, context was everything. A single word could have multiple meanings depending on the surrounding text. A clause that seemed straightforward in isolation could become something entirely different when read in conjunction with other sections. And as she read deeper, as she cross-referenced sections and traced the implications of specific phrasings, she began to see it. The trap, it was brilliant, really, diabolical in its subtlety. The English version of the contract was exactly as Khalid had been told, a standard partnership agreement with fair terms. But the Arabic version, the version that would be legally binding in any disputes involving Gulf state law, was something else entirely. There were 3 key differences, each one hidden in language so technical that even most native Arabic speakers would miss them. First, a clause about profit distribution that seemed to guarantee Khalid 60% of all profits. But the Arabic phrasing used a specific term, arba al-zahira, which meant apparent profits rather than actual profits. Combined with another clause about accounting methods, this would allow the investors to classify most profits as non-apparent and therefore not subject to the 60-40 split. Khalid would end up with perhaps 20% of actual profits, while believing he had 60. Second, a section on decision-making authority that appeared to give Khalid final say on all major business decisions. But it included a phrase, fi hudud al-istithmarat al-asasiyat, which translated to within the limits of primary investments. Another clause defined primary investments so narrowly that it would exclude virtually all significant decisions. The investors would have de facto control while Khalid believed he maintained authority. Third, and most devastating, a clause about share transfer that seemed to simply establish procedures for buying and selling partnership shares. But it included language that would automatically trigger a revaluation event if certain financial targets weren't met within 3 years. The targets were set impossibly high, virtually guaranteeing failure, and the revaluation would force Khalid to sell 60% of his shares to the investors at a price determined by an arbitration panel that, according to another buried clause, would be selected entirely by the investors themselves. In 3 years, Khalid would lose control of his own company, forced to sell at whatever price the investors decided, and there would be nothing he could do about it. It was theft, pure and simple, dressed up in legal language and hidden in translation, and it had Richard Blackwell's fingerprints all over it. Maya sat back, her hands shaking. This was exactly the kind of linguistic manipulation she had written about in her dissertation, the way commercial Arabic could be weaponized by those who understood its subtleties. Richard had stolen her work and used it to create the perfect fraud. She looked at the clock. 7 p.m. She had been reading for 6 hours and her eyes burned with fatigue. But she had found it. She had found the trap. Now she had to decide what to do about it. She could call Khalid right now, tell him what she had found, and walk away. She would have done her part, fulfilled her obligation. He would handle the rest and she could return to her safe, invisible life. But even as she thought it, she knew she couldn't. Because this wasn't just about Khalid's $500 million. This was about Richard Blackwell using her stolen work to commit fraud. This was about justice, not just for Khalid, but for herself. For the first time in 2 years, Maya Chen felt like herself again. Not a waitress, not invisible, not a victim. A scholar, an expert, someone who mattered. She pulled out her phone and dialed the number on Khalid's card. He answered on the first ring. "Miss Chen, tell me." "I found it," she said, and her voice was steady and strong. "I found the trap." "And it's worse than you thought." There was a long pause. "Then where are you?" "Still at the restaurant. Stay there." "I'm coming to you. We have work to do." He hung up before she could respond. Maya set down her phone and looked at the contract spread across the table, at the beautiful Arabic script that concealed such ugly intentions. She thought about Richard, probably at home right now, confident and comfortable, certain that his plan was perfect and undetectable. He had underestimated her once before, had dismissed her as insignificant and easily crushed. He was about to learn that was a mistake. 20 minutes later, Khalid strode into the salon privé like a man going to war. He had changed from his suit into more casual clothes, dark jeans and a black sweater that somehow made him look more dangerous rather than less formal. His eyes found Maya immediately, and she saw the intensity there, the focused determination of someone who had identified an enemy. "Show me," he said without preamble. For the next 3 hours, Maya walked him through every clause, every subtle manipulation, every hidden trap. She explained the linguistic nuances, the way certain Arabic phrases had multiple meanings, the way Richard had exploited the differences between the English and Arabic versions to create a contract that said 2 completely different things, depending on which language you read. Khalid listened with absolute focus, asking sharp questions, making notes, his anger growing more controlled and more dangerous with each revelation. This was a man who had built an empire through intelligence and ruthlessness, and Maya could see both qualities in full display now. "This clause here," she said, pointing to a section near the end of the contract, establishes the arbitration panel that would determine the share price if the revaluation is triggered. In English, it says the panel will be mutually agreed upon by both parties. But in Arabic, it uses the phrase يتم الاتفاق عليها من قبال الأطراف المستثمر, which means agreed upon by the investing parties. Since you're not technically an investing party in this transaction, you're the party being invested in, you would have no say in selecting the arbitrators. Khalid's jaw tightened. So they would choose the panel. The panel would set an artificially low price for my shares, and I would be legally obligated to sell at that price. Exactly. Within 3 years, they would own 60% of your company, having paid perhaps 10 cents on the dollar for shares worth billions. And it would all be completely legal according to the contract you signed. "Brilliant," Khalid said, and there was a note of grudging respect in his voice. "Evil but brilliant. This level of sophistication, this isn't just legal expertise. This requires deep understanding of Arabic commercial language, the kind that takes years to develop." 5 years, Maya said quietly. "It takes about 5 years of intensive study to reach this level of fluency in commercial dialect variations. I know because that's how long I spent on my dissertation." Their eyes met, and understanding passed between them. This wasn't just Richard's work. This was Maya's work, stolen and perverted, used to commit the exact kind of fraud she had written about preventing. "He stole your research and used it to create the perfect weapon," Khalid said. "And he's been using it for how long? How many other deals has he done like this?" "I don't know. But if he's been working as a legal consultant for 2 years, Maya trailed off, the implications staggering. "We need to find out. If he's done this to others, if there are more victims." Khalid stood and began pacing, his mind clearly racing. "This is bigger than just my deal. This is systematic fraud on an international scale. What are you going to do?" He stopped pacing and looked at her. and she saw something in his expression that made her breath catch. Not anger now, but determination. And something else. Respect, maybe even admiration. We are going to expose him. Not just stop this deal, but expose everything he's done. Destroy his career the way he destroyed yours. But I can't do it without you, Miss Chen. I need your expertise, your knowledge, your testimony. I need you to step out of the shadows and fight. Maya's heart hammered in her chest. This was what she had wanted, wasn't it? Justice, vindication, a chance to matter again. But it was also terrifying. Stepping forward meant making herself visible, vulnerable. It meant facing Richard again, facing the people who had believed him over her, facing the possibility of failure and humiliation all over again. I'm scared, she admitted, the words barely audible. Good, Khalid said. Fear means you understand the stakes. But let me tell you something, Miss Chen. Last night when that fool attacked you, you didn't cower. You didn't apologize for existing. You stood your ground with dignity and grace. That's not the behavior of someone who is defeated. That's the behavior of a warrior who has been waiting for the right battle. He moved closer, and Maya found herself standing to meet him, drawn by the intensity of his presence. I'm offering you that battle, he continued. I'm offering you resources, protection, and a platform. But more than that, I'm offering you partnership. Not employer and employee. Not wealthy client and service worker. Partners equals two people who have both been betrayed and who are both ready to fight back. Why? Maya asked. Why do you care so much about what happened to me? Do you have your own problems to deal with? Because I recognize you, Khalid said simply. 30 years ago, I was 28 years old with a small oil services company and big dreams. My business partner, a man I trusted like a brother, tried to steal everything from me. He forged documents, manipulated contracts, turned our employees against me. Everyone believed him because he was older, more established, more credible. I was just a kid with ambition. What did you do? I fought. It took me 2 years, but I gathered evidence, built my case, and exposed him. I won, but barely. And I learned something important. The world doesn't give you justice. You have to take it. You have to be willing to fight even when everyone says you'll lose, even when you're scared, even when it would be easier to walk away. He held out his hand. So I'm asking you, Maya Chen, will you fight? She looked at his outstretched hand, at the certainty in his eyes, at the chance he was offering her. She thought about the last 2 years, about being invisible, about serving tables and pretending she was someone she wasn't. She thought about Richard, smug and confident, using her work to hurt people. And she thought about who she had been before, brilliant, passionate, unafraid. Maybe it was time to be that person again. Maya reached out and took his hand. His grip was firm and warm, and she felt something shift inside her, like a door opening after being locked for too long. I'll fight, she said. Khalid smiled, and it transformed his face, making him look younger and somehow more dangerous. Good, then let's plan our war. They worked through the night, ordering food from the restaurant kitchen, spreading documents across the table, building their case. Khalid made calls to his legal team, his financial advisors, his investigators. Maya analyzed every contract Richard had worked on for the past 2 years, finding patterns, identifying other potential frauds. And as they worked, something unexpected happened. They talked, not just about the case, but about their lives, their experiences, their scars. Khalid told her about growing up in Dubai, about building his empire from nothing, about the loneliness of being at the top. Maya told him about her love of languages, about the beauty she found in Arabic poetry, about the devastation of having her dreams stolen. Somewhere around 3 a.m., exhausted and running on coffee and determination, Maya looked up from a contract and found Khalid watching her, with an expression she couldn't quite read. What? She asked. I was just thinking, he said slowly, that Richard Blackwell made a critical error in judgment. What's that? He assumed that destroying your career would destroy you. He thought that taking away your platform would make you powerless. Khalid leaned forward, his eyes intense. But power doesn't come from positions or titles, Miss Chen. It comes from knowledge, skill, and character. He took your position, but he couldn't take your power. You've had it all along. You just needed a reason to use it again. Maya felt tears prick her eyes, but this time she didn't fight them. Thank you, she whispered, for seeing me, for believing me. Thank you for saving me from making a catastrophic mistake, and for reminding me why I got into business in the first place, not just to make money, but to build something meaningful, to fight for what's right. They held each other's gaze for a long moment, and Maya felt something pass between them, understanding, respect, and something else, something that made her heart beat faster and her breath catch, something that was probably dangerous and definitely complicated, but that was a problem for another time. Right now they had work to do. By dawn they had their strategy. Khalid would proceed with the signing ceremony as planned, but with modifications. He would invite not just the investors and Richard, but also several other business leaders from the Gulf states, men who had worked with Richard on similar deals. He would have his legal team present, along with independent arbitrators, and he would have Maya. "Are you sure about this?" Maya asked as the sun began to rise over Manhattan, painting the sky in shades of gold and pink. "Once we do this, there's no going back. Richard will fight. The investors will fight. It could get ugly." "It's already ugly," Khalid said. "We're just bringing it into the light." He stood and stretched, his sweater riding up slightly to reveal a strip of toned abdomen that Maya definitely didn't notice. "Go home, get some sleep. We have a war to win this afternoon and I need you sharp. What about you?" "I'll sleep when Richard Blackwell is in handcuffs." He smiled, but there was steel in it. "Besides, I'm used to running on no sleep and pure spite. It's how I built my empire." Maya laughed despite her exhaustion. "That's a terrible business strategy. And yet here I am, billionaire, clearly something worked." She gathered her things, preparing to leave, but paused at the door. "Khalid." It was the first time she had used his first name, and she saw his eyes widen slightly at the familiarity. "Yes? Thank you. For giving me a chance to fight back. Whatever happens today, thank you for that." "Thank me when we win," he said. "Now go, rest, prepare. This afternoon we change everything." Maya left the restaurant as the city was waking up, the streets beginning to fill with early morning commuters. She felt exhausted and energized in equal measure, terrified and exhilarated. In less than 12 hours, she would face Richard Blackwell again. She would step out of the shadows and into the light. She would stop being invisible, and she would finally get her justice. The signing ceremony was scheduled for 2 p.m. in the grand ballroom of the Mandarin Oriental, a space designed to impress with its soaring ceilings, crystal chandeliers, and floor-to-ceiling windows overlooking Central Park. When Maya arrived at 1:30, the room was already filling with people, investors, lawyers, journalists, and business leaders whose combined net worth probably exceeded the GDP of small nations. She had dressed carefully for this moment, trading her waitress uniform for a tailored navy suit that Khalid had sent to her apartment that morning, along with a note. "Warriors need armor. This is yours." The suit fit perfectly, making her look professional and confident. She had pulled her hair back in a sleek bun, applied minimal makeup, and added the only jewelry she owned, a delicate gold necklace her grandmother had given her. She looked like the scholar she had been, the expert she still was, but her hands were shaking as she entered the ballroom. Khalid found her immediately, materializing at her side as if he had been watching for her arrival. He wore a charcoal suit that probably cost more than her annual rent, and he looked every inch the billionaire Sheikh, powerful, confident, untouchable. But when he looked at her, his expression softened slightly. "You look ready for battle. I feel like I'm going to throw up. That's normal. I threw up before my first major business presentation, and my second, and my 10th. He offered her his arm. "Come, let me introduce you to some people." For the next 20 minutes, Khalid walked her through the room, introducing her to business leaders and sheikhs from across the Gulf states. He didn't introduce her as his waitress or even as a consultant. He introduced her as Dr. Maya Chen, the foremost expert on Arabic commercial linguistics. Maya noticed that several of the men looked surprised, then thoughtful. A few asked her questions about her research, and she answered with growing confidence, falling back into the expertise she had spent years developing. This was her language, her field. She belonged here, and then she saw him. Richard Blackwell stood near the signing table, surrounded by the American investors, holding court with his characteristic charm. He looked exactly as she remembered, tall, handsome in a conventional way, with sandy hair going silver at the temples and a smile that had once made her heart race. Now it just made her angry. He hadn't seen her yet. He was too busy basking in his moment of triumph, confident that his plan was perfect and undetectable. Khalid followed her gaze, and his expression hardened. "Ready? No, but let's do it anyway." They approached the signing table, and Maya watched as Richard's eyes swept past her, then snapped back, widening with shock. She saw the exact moment he recognized her, saw the color drain from his face, saw panic flash across his features before he controlled it. "Maya." His voice was uncertain, disbelieving. "What are you doing here?" "Dr. Chen is my linguistic consultant," Khalid said smoothly before Maya could respond. "I've asked her to review the contracts before we proceed with the signing. Standard precaution for international agreements." Richard's smile was strained. "That's unusual, but unnecessary, I assure you. Everything has been reviewed by multiple legal teams. Nevertheless, I insist." Khalid's tone left no room for argument. "Dr. Chen, if you would." This was it, the moment of truth. Maya could feel every eye in the room on her, could sense the confusion and curiosity of the assembled crowd. She took a deep breath and stepped forward to the table where the contracts lay waiting. "I've reviewed both the English and Arabic versions of these contracts," she began, her voice steady despite her racing heart. "And I've found significant discrepancies that I believe everyone should be aware of before any signatures are applied." Discrepancies? Patterson, the lead investor, frowned. "What kind of discrepancies?" "The kind that would result in Sheikh al-Rashid losing control of his company within 3 years, while believing he maintained majority ownership and authority." Maya picked up the Arabic version of the contract. "May I?" Khalid nodded, and Maya began to explain. She walked through each hidden clause, each linguistic manipulation, each trap that Richard had so carefully constructed. She used the projector screen to show the Arabic text alongside the English translation, highlighting the differences, explaining the implications. The room grew quieter as she spoke, the initial skepticism giving way to shock and then anger. The other Gulf state business leaders began conferring in rapid Arabic, their expressions darkening. The journalists were taking notes frantically, and the investors were looking increasingly pale. Richard tried to interrupt several times, but Khalid silenced him with a gesture. "Let her finish." When Maya concluded her presentation, the silence was absolute. Then one of the other sheikhs, a man named Abdullah, whom Khalid had introduced earlier, stood up. "Sheikh Khalid, I believe I need to speak with you privately. I used Mr. Blackwell's services on a contract last year, and now I'm wondering—" He trailed off, his expression grim. "As did I," another man said. "A partnership agreement with a European firm." The term seemed favorable, but now, one by one, 4 other business leaders came forward, each one admitting they had used Richard's services, each one now questioning whether they had been similarly deceived. Richard's face had gone from pale to red. "This is absurd. This woman is a disgraced graduate student with a grudge. She's making wild accusations based on misinterpretations of complex legal language." "I'm not disgraced," Maya said, and her voice cut through his bluster like a knife. "I'm the author of the dissertation you stole. The research you built your career on, that was mine. Every word, every analysis, every insight. You stole it, published it under your name, and destroyed my career when I tried to expose you." "That's a lie. I can prove—" "Can you?" Khalid stepped forward, and there was something dangerous in his movement. "Because I've had my investigators looking into your background, Mr. Blackwell, and they found some interesting things, like the fact that before Dr. Chen's dissertation was published under your name, you had never published anything on Arabic linguistics. Your expertise was in corporate law, not language, yet suddenly you're an expert. That's quite a leap. I collaborated with Maya on her research." "No, you didn't." Maya's voice was firm. "You were my advisor. You had access to my work, and when you saw how groundbreaking it was, you stole it. You knew I was just a graduate student, that no one would believe me over you. You were right about that. But you made one mistake." "What's that?" Richard's voice was venomous now, all pretense of charm gone. "You assumed I would stay defeated. You assumed that destroying my career meant I would disappear, that I would never have a chance to fight back." Maya smiled, and it was not a kind expression. "You were wrong." Khalid pulled out his phone. I'm calling the authorities. I believe we have enough evidence here for charges of fraud, theft of intellectual property, and conspiracy. And I suspect once they start investigating, they'll find a lot more. You can't prove anything. Richard's voice rose, desperate now. It's her word against mine. Actually, Maya said quietly, I can prove it. I kept everything. Every draft of my dissertation, every email exchange, every note from our meetings. I have timestamps, metadata, version histories. I have proof that I wrote that dissertation months before you published it. I just never had the platform to present that proof. Until now, the room erupted. Journalists surged forward with questions. The investors were arguing among themselves, clearly trying to distance themselves from Richard. The other sheikhs were demanding their contracts be reviewed immediately. And through it all, Richard stood frozen, watching his carefully constructed world collapse around him. Security arrived within minutes, followed shortly by police. As Richard was led away, not in handcuffs yet, but clearly under investigation, he looked back at Maya with pure hatred in his eyes. You'll regret this, he hissed. I'll destroy you. You already tried that, Maya said. It didn't work. And now it's my turn. The aftermath was chaos. The signing ceremony was obviously cancelled. The investors were facing their own legal troubles for their role in the fraud. The journalists were already filing stories that would dominate the business news cycle for weeks. And Maya found herself surrounded by people, lawyers wanting her testimony, business leaders wanting her expertise, universities wanting to discuss her returning to academia. It was overwhelming and exhilarating and terrifying all at once. Khalid extracted her from the crowd with practiced ease, guiding her to a quiet corner of the ballroom. How are you holding up? I don't know, Maya admitted. I feel like I'm in shock. Did that really just happen? It really just happened. You just exposed one of the biggest fraud schemes in international business. You just got your justice, and you just proved to everyone in this room that you're exactly as brilliant as your research suggested. He smiled. How does it feel? Surreal, terrifying, amazing. She laughed, a slightly hysterical edge to it. I think I might actually throw up now. Please don't, that suit was expensive. But his eyes were warm with amusement and something deeper. Maya, what you did today took incredible courage. You stood in front of some of the most powerful people in the world and told them a truth they didn't want to hear. You faced down the man who destroyed your career. You didn't waver, didn't back down. You were magnificent. Maya felt heat rise to her cheeks. I couldn't have done it without you. You gave me the platform, the protection, the chance. I gave you the opportunity. You did the rest. He hesitated, then continued more quietly. I want to make you an offer. A real one, not just for this case. I need someone I can trust to review all my international contracts, someone who understands the linguistic nuances that my regular legal team misses. I want you to be my director of international linguistic affairs. Full position, full salary, full authority. You would work directly with me on all major deals. Khalid, that's incredibly generous, but it's not generosity. It's good business. You're the best at what you do, and I need the best. But more than that, he paused, seeming to choose his words carefully. Over the past 24 hours, I've seen you at your worst and your best. I've seen you scared and brave, defeated and triumphant. And through it all, I've seen someone with integrity, intelligence and strength. Those are rare qualities, Maya. I don't want to lose access to them. There was something in his voice, in the way he looked at her, that made Maya's breath catch. This wasn't just about business. They both knew it. I need to think about it, she said softly. 24 hours ago, I was a waitress trying to stay invisible. Now I don't even know what I am. I need time to process all of this. Of course. Take all the time you need. He pulled out another business card. How many did he have? And wrote something on the back. My personal cell, my personal email, and the address of my New York residence. When you're ready to talk about the job or anything else, contact me. Any time, day or night. He handed her the card, and their fingers brushed. The contact sent a jolt through Maya that had nothing to do with business and everything to do with the way he was looking at her. Like she was something precious and powerful and worth protecting. Thank you, she whispered. For everything. Thank you for saving me. In more ways than one. He stepped back, breaking the moment. I should go deal with the legal aftermath of this disaster. But Maya, You're not invisible anymore. You never should have been." He walked away, leaving Maya standing alone in the corner of the ballroom, holding his card and feeling like her entire world had shifted on its axis. She had come here as a waitress, seeking justice. She was leaving as an expert, a warrior, a woman who had faced her demons and won, and maybe, just maybe, as someone who had found something unexpected in the process, a connection with a man who saw her not as she had been, or as she appeared to be, but as she truly was. But that was a thought for later. Right now she had interviews to give, statements to make, and a career to rebuild. Maya Chen was no longer invisible, and she was just getting started. The next 3 weeks passed in a whirlwind that left Maya feeling like she was living someone else's life. The story of the fraud exposure went viral. "Waitress Genius Saves Billionaire Sheikh from $500 million Scam" was the headline that appeared in every major business publication. Her face was everywhere, her story told and retold, each version adding new dramatic flourishes. The legal proceedings moved quickly. Richard Blackwell was formally charged with fraud, theft of intellectual property and conspiracy. The evidence Maya had preserved, every draft, every email, every time-stamped document, proved beyond doubt that he had stolen her dissertation. 3 other victims came forward with similar stories of academic theft, and the investigation expanded to include his fraudulent contracts with multiple international clients. Richard's career was destroyed. His law license was suspended, pending the outcome of the criminal trial. The university that had published his stolen dissertation issued a formal retraction and apology, and Maya received offers from 5 different institutions to complete her doctorate and publish her original research under her own name. She accepted an offer from Columbia University, which not only welcomed her back to academia, but offered her a position as a visiting professor while she completed her degree. The department head personally apologized for not investigating her claims more thoroughly 2 years ago, and while Maya appreciated the gesture, she knew it was too little, too late. She had learned a hard lesson about institutional loyalty, but through it all, through the interviews and the legal meetings and the academic negotiations, Maya found her thoughts returning again and again to Khalid. They had spoken several times since the signing ceremony, brief phone calls about the legal case, a few emails coordinating their testimonies, one lunch meeting that was ostensibly about business, but felt like something more. He was unfailingly professional, respectful of her space and her need to process everything that had happened. But there was something in the way he looked at her during that lunch, something in the way his voice softened when he said her name, that made her wonder if he felt it too, this pull, this connection that had formed in the crucible of their shared battle. She hadn't given him an answer about the job offer, partly because she was genuinely uncertain about what she wanted to do with her future, but partly because she knew that accepting would mean seeing him regularly, working closely with him, and she wasn't sure she trusted herself to keep things professional, because the truth was, she was attracted to him, not just to his power or his wealth, though she'd be lying if she said those things didn't add to his appeal, but to him, to his intelligence, his integrity, his unexpected kindness, to the way he had seen her when she was invisible, had believed her when no one else would, had given her the chance to fight back. She was attracted to him, and that terrified her. Because she had trusted the wrong man before, had let her guard down and been destroyed for it. How could she trust her judgment now? These were the thoughts occupying her mind 3 weeks after the signing ceremony, as she sat in her new apartment, a modest but comfortable 1-bedroom in a better neighborhood, paid for with the advance from her book deal. Yes, she had a book deal now. Her life had become that surreal. Her phone rang and she saw Khalid's name on the screen. Her heart did a little flip that she tried to ignore. "Hello? Maya, I hope I'm not disturbing you." His voice was warm, familiar now in a way that made her chest ache. Not at all. "I was just reviewing some research proposals." "What's up?" "I wanted to let you know that the investigation into Richard's other contracts has concluded. They found evidence of fraud in 7 additional deals, totaling over $200 million in stolen assets. He's looking at 15 to 20 years in prison." Maya closed her eyes, feeling a wave of emotion she couldn't quite name. Relief, vindication, and surprisingly, a touch of sadness. Not for Richard. He deserved everything he got, but for the person she had been, who had trusted him, who had believed in him. That's good. Justice served. Indeed, there was a pause. Maya, there's something else. The other victims of Richard's frauds, the business leaders whose contracts he manipulated, they've asked me to organize a dinner, a celebration of sorts, and a thank you to you for exposing the scheme. It's this Saturday at 8 at Le Bernardin. I know it's short notice, but I was hoping you would attend. I don't know, Khalid. I'm not really comfortable being celebrated. You saved these men millions of dollars and years of legal troubles. They want to express their gratitude and, he hesitated, I would like to see you. We've been playing phone tag for weeks and I miss talking to you in person. The admission hung in the air between them, honest and vulnerable. Maya's breath caught. Okay, she heard herself say. I'll be there. Excellent. I'll send a car for you at 7:30. That's not necessary. Maya, let me do this, please. You've spent 2 years taking the subway and walking in the cold. Let me send you a car. Let me take care of you just for one evening. There was something in his voice that made it impossible to refuse. Okay, thank you. No, thank you. For agreeing to come, for everything. I'll see you Saturday. He hung up and Maya sat staring at her phone, her heart racing. This was dangerous. This feeling, this pull toward him. She should be focusing on her career, on rebuilding her life, not on a billionaire sheikh who lived in a completely different world than hers. But God help her. She wanted to see him, wanted to sit across from him and talk about something other than legal cases and fraud investigations, wanted to see if this connection she felt was real or just a product of the intense circumstances that had brought them together. Saturday couldn't come fast. Enough? The car that arrived to pick up Maya on Saturday evening was not the understated sedan she had expected, but a sleek black Mercedes with a driver in a proper uniform. She felt ridiculous climbing into it wearing the one cocktail dress she owned, a simple black sheath that she had bought for academic conferences back when she had a career, but the driver treated her like royalty. Le Bernardin was one of the most exclusive restaurants in New York, the kind of place Maya had only read about in magazines. As she was escorted through the elegant dining room to a private area in the back, she felt eyes following her, and for once, she didn't mind being seen. The private dining room was smaller than the one at Le Ciel Bleu, but no less impressive, with warm lighting and a table set for 12. Several men were already there, and Maya recognized them as the business leaders who had been at the signing ceremony. They greeted her warmly, thanking her effusively for her work, and she accepted their gratitude with as much grace as she could muster. But her eyes kept searching the room for one person. Khalid arrived 15 minutes later, and Maya's breath caught at the sight of him. He wore a traditional thobe, a long white robe with a black bisht draped over his shoulders, and a white gutra held in place with a black agal. It was the first time she had seen him in traditional dress, and the effect was striking. He looked powerful, regal, and utterly magnetic. His eyes found hers immediately, and the smile that crossed his face was warm and genuine. He made his way through the room, greeting the other guests, but his path led inevitably to her. Dr. Chen, he said, and there was something in the way he said her title that made it sound like an endearment. You look beautiful. Thank you. You look... She gestured at his attire, momentarily at a loss for words. This is traditional dress? It is. I thought it appropriate for the occasion, a celebration of cultural understanding and respect. Do you approve? Very much, she smiled. Though I have to admit I'm more used to seeing you in business suits. I contain multitudes, he said with a slight smile. As do you, I'm learning. Before she could respond, they were called to dinner. Khalid maneuvered things so that Maya was seated next to him, and as the meal progressed, course after exquisite course, they fell into easy conversation. They talked about her return to Colombia, about his business expansion plans, about books and travel, and 100 small things that had nothing to do with fraud or legal cases, and Maya realized something that both thrilled and terrified her. She liked him. Not just respected him or was grateful to him, but genuinely liked him. He was funny in a dry, subtle way. He was curious about her opinions and actually listened when she spoke. He challenged her intellectually without being condescending. And when he looked at her, she felt seen in a way that had nothing to do with her expertise or her usefulness, and everything to do with her as a person. Halfway through dinner, one of the other guests, Sheikh Abdullah, stood to make a toast. My friends, we are here tonight to celebrate not just the exposure of a fraud, but the courage of one woman who refused to stay silent. Dr. Maya Chen could have walked away. She could have let us all fall into the trap that had been set for us. But instead she stepped forward, risked her own safety and reputation, and saved us all. To Dr. Chen, may we all have such courage when it matters most. To Dr. Chen. The table chorused, raising their glasses. Maya felt tears prick her eyes. She had spent 2 years being invisible, being dismissed, being treated as if she didn't matter. And now here she was, being celebrated by some of the most powerful men in international business. "Thank you," she managed to say. "But I didn't do it alone. Sheikh al-Rashid gave me the platform and the protection to speak truth. Without him, I would still be invisible. And without you," Khalid said quietly, his voice meant only for her, "I would have lost everything." "We saved each other, Maya. That's what partners do." Partners. The word hung between them, heavy with meaning. The dinner continued, but Maya was increasingly aware of Khalid's presence beside her, the warmth of his body, the occasional brush of his arm against hers, the way his attention kept returning to her, even as he conversed with the other guests. And she was aware of her own response to him, the way her pulse quickened when he leaned close to speak to her, the way she found herself laughing at his jokes, the way she didn't want the evening to end. Finally, as dessert was being cleared and the other guests were beginning to make their departures, Khalid turned to her. "Walk with me," he asked. "There's a terrace upstairs. The view is spectacular." She should say no, should thank him for a lovely evening and go home to her safe, uncomplicated life. Should not follow this man to a private terrace, where they would be alone. And she would have to confront these feelings that were growing stronger by the minute. "I'd like that," she said. The terrace was indeed spectacular, offering a panoramic view of the Manhattan skyline lit up against the night sky. The air was cool but not cold, and Maya wrapped her arms around herself as she stood at the railing, looking out at the city that had been her home for so long, but had never quite felt like it until now. Khalid stood beside her, close enough that she could feel his warmth, but not touching. For a long moment, they simply stood in comfortable silence, watching the city lights. "I have a confession," Khalid said finally. "That job offer I made you 3 weeks ago, it wasn't entirely about business." Maya's heart began to race. No, I mean, you are genuinely the best at what you do, and I do need your expertise. But that's not the only reason I want you working with me." He turned to face her, and in the dim light of the terrace, his eyes were intense. "Maya, in the past 3 weeks, I've tried to convince myself that what I feel for you is just gratitude or respect, or admiration for your courage. But I'm not a man who lies to himself. The truth is, I'm attracted to you. Not just to your mind, though God knows that's impressive enough, but to you, to your strength and your vulnerability, your passion and your caution, your brilliance and your humility." Maya couldn't breathe, couldn't think, could only stare at him as he continued. "I know the timing is terrible. I know you're rebuilding your life, and probably don't need the complication of a relationship with someone like me. I know there are 1,000 reasons why this is a bad idea. But I also know that I haven't been able to stop thinking about you since the moment you stood up in that restaurant and spoke to me in perfect classical Arabic. You fascinate me, Maya Chen, and I wanted you to know that before you make your decision about the job." "Why?" Maya asked, her voice barely above a whisper. "Why tell me this now?" "Because I don't want you to take the job out of obligation or gratitude. If you work with me, I want it to be because you want to, because you see the value in what we could build together. And I want you to make that decision with full information about how I feel. If you're not interested, if you want to keep things purely professional, I'll respect that. But I couldn't let you decide without knowing the truth." Maya's mind was racing. Part of her wanted to run, to protect herself from the possibility of being hurt again. But a larger part, the part that had stood up to Richard, that had fought for justice, that had refused to stay invisible, wanted to be brave one more time. "I'm scared," she admitted. "The last time I trusted someone, the last time I let myself care about someone, he destroyed me." "How do I know you won't do the same?" "You don't," Khalid said simply. "I can't promise I'll never hurt you, Maya. I'm human and humans make mistakes. But I can promise that I will never intentionally betray you. I will never steal from you or diminish you, or try to make you smaller so I can feel bigger. I will never ask you to be invisible. And if I do hurt you, I will own it and work to make it right." He stepped closer, and Maya's breath caught. "I'm not Richard Blackwell," he continued, his voice low and intense. "I'm not interested in taking from you. I'm interested in building with you, in seeing what we could create together. In business, yes, but also in life. You challenge me, Maya. You make me want to be better. And I hope I do the same for you." Maya looked up at him, at this powerful man who was offering her not just a job, but a partnership. Not just respect, but something deeper. She thought about the past 3 weeks, about how often she had found herself thinking of him, wanting to talk to him, missing his presence. She thought about how alive she felt when she was with him, how seen and valued and understood. She thought about courage, and about the fact that sometimes the bravest thing you could do was not to fight, but to trust. "I'm interested," she said softly, "in the job and in you, but I need to go slowly. I need time to rebuild myself before I can think about building something with someone else." "Then we'll go slowly," Khalid said immediately. "As slowly as you need. I'm not going anywhere, Maya. I'm patient when something matters. And you matter." He reached out and gently tucked a strand of hair behind her ear, his fingers lingering for just a moment against her cheek. The touch was electric, sending shivers down Maya's spine. "So you'll take the job?" he asked. "I'll take the job. On one condition. Name it. We keep things professional at work. If we're going to explore this," she gestured between them, "we do it outside the office. I need to prove to myself that I can succeed on my own merits, not because I'm involved with the boss." Khalid smiled. "Agreed. Though I should warn you, keeping things professional around you is going to be a challenge. You're very distracting." Maya laughed, feeling lighter than she had in years. "I'll try to be less distracting." "Please don't. I like being distracted by you." He stepped back, giving her space. "Come on, let me take you home. We both have work tomorrow, and I have a feeling we're going to be spending a lot of time together in the coming weeks." As they left the terrace and made their way back through the restaurant, Maya felt something shift inside her. For 2 years she had been hiding, protecting herself, playing it safe. But safety hadn't brought her happiness. It had brought her stagnation. Maybe it was time to take a risk. Maybe it was time to trust again, to build again, to let herself be seen not just as an expert or a victim or a warrior, but as a woman. A woman who deserved love and partnership and all the messy, complicated, beautiful things that came with opening your heart. Maybe it was time to stop being invisible and start being fully, completely courageously alive, and maybe, just maybe, Khalid al-Rashid was the right person to take that risk with. Only time would tell. But for the first time in 2 years, Maya was excited to find out. The next 6 months transformed Maya's life in ways she never could have imagined. She officially started her position as Director of International Linguistic Affairs for Al-Rashid Enterprises, working out of Khalid's New York office in a sleek high-rise in Midtown. Her job was exactly what he had promised, reviewing contracts, consulting on international deals, and using her expertise to prevent the kind of fraud that Richard had attempted. She was good at it. Better than good. She was exceptional. Within 3 months, she had identified potential issues in 4 different contracts, saving the company millions and earning the respect of Khalid's entire legal team. She published 2 papers on commercial Arabic linguistics, re-establishing her academic credentials, and she completed her doctorate at Columbia, defending her original dissertation, properly attributed this time, to a standing ovation. Dr. Maya Chen was no longer invisible. She was a force to be reckoned with, but the most significant transformation was in her relationship with Khalid. True to their agreement, they kept things strictly professional at work. In the office, he was Sheikh al-Rashid, CEO and her employer. She was Dr. Chen, his linguistic consultant. They maintained appropriate boundaries, communicated through official channels, and never let their personal feelings interfere with business decisions. But outside the office, that was a different story. They had dinner together at least twice a week, sometimes at exclusive restaurants, sometimes at small hole-in-the-wall places that Khalid insisted made the best food in the city. They went to museums and concerts and Broadway shows. They took long walks through Central Park, talking about everything and nothing. They shared their histories, their dreams, their fears, and slowly, carefully, Maya let her walls come down. She learned that Khalid was more than just a brilliant businessman. He was passionate about renewable energy and genuinely wanted to make the world better. He was devoted to his family back in Dubai, calling his mother every Sunday without fail. He had a dry sense of humor that caught her off guard and made her laugh until her sides hurt. And he was patient with her in a way that made her heart ache, never pushing, never demanding, always letting her set the pace. He learned that Maya loved old movies and terrible puns, that she could cook exactly 3 dishes well and burned everything else, that she was terrified of heights but loved flying, that she cried during sad commercials but stayed stoic through actual tragedies, that she was still healing from Richard's betrayal but was stronger than she gave herself credit for. They learned each other, piece by piece, moment by moment. And somewhere along the way, Maya realized she was falling in love with him. It terrified her, but it also felt right in a way nothing else ever had. The turning point came on a cold February evening, 6 months after the signing ceremony that had changed everything. Khalid had invited Maya to his penthouse for dinner. He was cooking, he insisted, and she had to come see his kitchen because it was criminally underused. Maya arrived at 7 to find Khalid in jeans and a casual sweater, looking more relaxed than she had ever seen him. His penthouse was stunning. Floor-to-ceiling windows, modern furniture, and art that probably cost more than most people's houses. But it also felt lived in, comfortable, with books scattered on tables and family photos on the mantel. "Welcome to my humble abode," he said with a smile, taking her coat. "I hope you're hungry. I'm attempting lamb tagine and I make no promises about its quality." "You cook?" Maya was genuinely surprised. "I do many things that might surprise you." "Dr. Chen, I'm a man of hidden depths." He led her to the kitchen, which was indeed impressive, all stainless steel and marble countertops. My mother insisted all her children learn to cook. She said depending on others for basic survival was a weakness. Smart woman. The smartest. You'd like her. She's terrifying and wonderful in equal measure. They cooked together, or rather, Khalid cooked while Maya sat on a counter and kept him company, occasionally handing him ingredients or tasting things when he asked. It was domestic and comfortable, and Maya felt something in her chest loosen, some last bit of fear finally letting go. "Can I ask you something?" she said as he stirred the tagine. "Anything. Why me? You could have anyone, models, actresses, socialites, women who fit into your world. Why pursue someone like me?" Khalid set down his spoon and turned to face her, his expression serious. "Because those women would fit into my world as it is. But you make me want to build a better world. You challenge me, Maya. You don't let me get away with anything. You see past the money and the power to who I actually am, and you like that person. Or at least I hope you do." "I do," Maya said softly. "I really do." "Good, because I'm in love with you, and it would be awkward if you didn't at least like me." The words hung in the air between them, simple and devastating. Maya's heart stopped, then started again, racing. "You're in love with me?" "Hopelessly. Have been for months. I was trying to wait until you were ready to hear it, but apparently I have no self-control around you." He smiled, but there was vulnerability in his eyes. "You don't have to say it back. I know you need time. I just wanted you to know." Maya slid off the counter and walked to him, her heart pounding. She looked up at this man who had given her back her life, her career, her confidence. This man who had seen her when she was invisible, who had believed her when no one else would, who had been patient and kind and strong. This man she had been falling in love with for 6 months without quite admitting it to herself. "I love you too," she said, and watched his eyes widen with shock and joy. "I've been scared to admit it, scared to trust it, but I do. I love you, Khalid al-Rashid. You're arrogant and bossy and you have terrible taste in movies, but you're also kind and brilliant, and you make me want to be brave. So yes, I love you." The smile that broke across his face was like sunrise. "Terrible taste in movies? I have excellent taste in movies. You cried during Fast and Furious, but it was an emotional moment. The family was reunited." Maya laughed, and then Khalid was kissing her and she was kissing him back, and it felt like coming home. His hands cupped her face gently, reverently, as if she were something precious. Her arms wrapped around his neck, pulling him closer. The kiss was soft and deep and perfect, full of promise and possibility. When they finally broke apart, both breathing hard, Khalid rested his forehead against hers. "I've wanted to do that for 6 months," he murmured. "Why didn't you?" "Because you were worth waiting for." "You still are." I'll wait as long as you need, Maya, for everything. I'm not going anywhere. Good, she whispered. Because I think I'm done waiting. I think I'm ready to start building that better world you mentioned. Together. Together, he agreed. I like the sound of that. They ate dinner on the couch, the tagine forgotten until it was slightly overcooked but still delicious. They talked and laughed and kissed, and Maya felt something she hadn't felt in years, hope. Real, genuine hope for the future. She had been invisible for so long, had hidden herself away to stay safe. But Khalid had shown her that safety wasn't the same as living. That sometimes you had to risk being seen, risk being hurt, risk opening your heart, because that was the only way to find something real. And this man, this moment, this feeling was real. As the night wore on and the city lights twinkled outside the windows, Maya curled up against Khalid's side and thought about how far she had come. From a waitress trying to disappear to a doctor rebuilding her career. From a victim of betrayal to a woman in love, it hadn't been easy. There had been pain and fear, and moments when she wanted to give up. But she had fought through it all, had refused to stay defeated, had found the courage to be seen again, and now here she was. Exactly where she was supposed to be. What are you thinking? Khalid asked, his fingers running through her hair. That I'm happy, Maya said simply. For the first time in years, I'm genuinely happy. Good, you deserve to be happy. Maya, you deserve everything good this world has to offer. So do you. Then I guess we'll just have to make sure we both get it. He kissed the top of her head. Together. Together, Maya agreed, and for the first time in a very long time she believed in happy endings, but their story wasn't quite over yet. There was still one more chapter to write. The trial of Richard Blackwell began in late March, nearly 8 months after the signing ceremony. Maya had been dreading it, knowing she would have to face him again, would have to relive the betrayal and the pain. But when the day came, she walked into that courtroom with her head high, wearing one of the power suits Khalid had bought her, and carrying the weight of her restored reputation like armor. Khalid sat in the gallery, his presence a steady comfort. He had offered to testify as well, and his testimony about the fraudulent contracts had been damning. But it was Maya's testimony that truly sealed Richard's fate. She took the stand and told her story, all of it. The years of research, the groundbreaking dissertation, the trust she had placed in her advisor, the theft, the betrayal, the systematic destruction of her career, and then the evidence, emails, drafts, metadata, timestamps, proof beyond any doubt that she had written the dissertation Richard had claimed as his own. Richard's lawyers tried to discredit her, tried to paint her as bitter and vindictive. But Maya didn't waver. She answered every question calmly and clearly, her expertise evident in every word. And when Richard himself took the stand and tried to lie, tried to claim he had collaborated with her, Maya's lawyer presented evidence that destroyed his credibility piece by piece. The jury deliberated for less than 4 hours, guilty on all counts. Richard Blackwell was sentenced to 15 years in federal prison for fraud, theft of intellectual property, and conspiracy. His law license was permanently revoked. His reputation was destroyed beyond repair. And Maya finally got the justice she had been denied 2 years ago. As they left the courthouse, Khalid took her hand. How do you feel? Relieved, vindicated, and surprisingly a little sad. Sad for the person I was who trusted him, for the years I lost, for the fact that it had to come to this. She squeezed his hand, but also grateful, because if none of this had happened, I never would have met you, and I wouldn't trade that for anything. Khalid stopped walking and turned to face her, right there on the courthouse steps with journalists and cameras everywhere. Maya Chen, you are the strongest, most brilliant, most infuriating woman I have ever met. You drive me crazy and make me better, and I cannot imagine my life without you in it. Khalid, what are you? He dropped to one knee and Maya's heart stopped. Around them people gasped and cameras flashed, but she barely noticed. All she could see was Khalid, looking up at her with love and certainty in his eyes. I know this is fast. I know we've only been together for a few months, but I've spent 30 years building an empire, and none of it means anything compared to what I feel when I'm with you. You're my partner, my equal, my match in every way that matters. And I want to spend the rest of my life building something even better with you. He pulled out a small box and opened it, revealing a ring that took Maya's breath away. A perfect sapphire surrounded by diamonds, elegant and understated and absolutely stunning. "Maya Chen, will you marry me?" Maya looked down at him, at this powerful man kneeling before her, offering her not just his wealth or his name, but his heart. She thought about the journey that had brought them here, the pain and the triumph, the fear and the courage, the darkness and the light. She thought about the woman she had been, invisible, defeated, hiding from the world, and she thought about the woman she had become, strong, confident, loved. "Yes," she said, her voice clear and certain. "Yes, I'll marry you." Khalid stood and slipped the ring onto her finger, and then he was kissing her and she was kissing him back, and the crowd around them erupted in applause. Cameras flashed and people cheered, and Maya laughed against Khalid's lips, feeling joy bubble up inside her like champagne. "I love you," she whispered. "I love you too," he replied. "My brilliant, beautiful, brave Maya, my partner in everything." "Partners," she agreed, "in business and in life, forever, forever." And as they walked down the courthouse steps together, hand in hand, Maya realized that this was the real victory. Not the trial, not the vindication, not even the justice she had finally received. The real victory was this: finding someone who saw her, truly saw her, and loved what they found. Finding the courage to be seen, to be vulnerable, to open her heart again despite the risk. The real victory was choosing to live fully, completely, courageously, instead of hiding in the shadows. The real victory was love. 6 months later, Maya and Khalid were married in a small ceremony in Dubai, surrounded by family and close friends. Maya wore a dress that combined Western and Middle Eastern styles, a symbol of the two worlds they were bringing together. Khalid wore traditional dress, and when he saw her walking down the aisle, tears streamed down his face. They honeymooned in Morocco, exploring ancient cities and modern markets, eating incredible food and making love under desert stars. They talked about their future, the business they would build together, the family they hoped to have, the adventures they would share. And when they returned to New York, they returned as partners in every sense of the word. Maya continued her work as Director of International Linguistic Affairs, but she also launched a foundation to help other victims of academic theft and fraud. Khalid expanded his renewable energy initiatives, with Maya's linguistic expertise helping him navigate complex international partnerships. They bought a brownstone in Brooklyn, a place that was theirs together, filled with books and art and laughter. They hosted dinners for friends and colleagues, mixing business leaders and academics, creating connections and opportunities. They traveled the world for work and pleasure, always together, always partners, and on quiet evenings, when they sat on their couch with glasses of wine and watched the sun set over the city, Maya would sometimes think back to that night at Le Ciel Bleu, when she had been just a waitress trying to stay invisible. She would think about how one moment of courage, one decision to speak up instead of staying silent, had changed everything. She would think about Khalid, and how he had seen her when she was invisible, had believed her when no one else would, had given her the chance to fight back and reclaim her life. And she would think about love, real deep, transformative love, and how it had the power to heal even the deepest wounds. "What are you thinking about?" Khalid would ask, pulling her close. "How lucky I am," Maya would reply. "How far I've come. How grateful I am for that night when you walked into my restaurant and changed my life." "Our restaurant now," Khalid would correct with a smile. They had bought Le Ciel Bleu 6 months after their wedding, partly as an investment, but mostly as a symbol. "And I'm the lucky one, Habibti. You saved me in more ways than you know." "We saved each other," Maya would say, and it was true. They had saved each other, from fraud and betrayal, from loneliness and doubt, from lives half-lived and dreams deferred. They had found each other in the most unlikely of circumstances, and they had built something beautiful together, a partnership, a love, a life. And Maya Chen, who had once been invisible, who had once believed she would never matter again, now knew with absolute certainty that she mattered very much indeed, not because of her degrees or her job or her husband's wealth, but because she had found the courage to be seen, to be vulnerable, to be fully and completely herself. And in doing so, she had found everything she never knew she needed: love, justice, purpose, home. She had found it all, and she was never going to be invisible again.